JT had been with the Saints of Hell going on 2 years, since almost the day he got back from Afghanistan. Moving up from hang-around to prospect, still doing the shit work till he could get his patch. Like this, driving 2 days to Moncton to meet a guy who picked up 80 kilos of cocaine offshore. Just before dawn, the freighter, Sharon David, carrying low-sulfur coal from Maracaibo, Venezuela to Sydney, Nova Scotia, passed by a mile off the coast, and one of the Filipino crew members tossed an oil drum overboard. At sunup, a lobster fisherman named Jerry McNeil and his brother-in-law followed the GPS signal to the drum and pulled it on board. They had the drum open and the coke in 3 hockey bags before they even got back to shore. Later that day, Jerry drove almost 4 hours from Port Dufferin to the Magnetic Hill Motel in Moncton, parked his pickup in front of room number 6, and went to the coffee shop. 10 minutes later, JT came out of room number 9, took the hockey bags, 60 pounds apiece, and left a backpack with 40 grand in cash. Enough to get Jerry through one more season, maybe even another. The price of lobsters doesn't go down as much as the price of fuel goes up. JT drove back to Toronto, 15 hours in a brand new Camaro, 300 horsepower and a Boston acoustic stereo. On the T-Can through New Brunswick, he saw a few signs for the U.S. border. 12 miles, 9 miles, always so close. And he thought how the coke he was carrying would bring almost twice as much wholesale in Canada, over 40 grand a kilo, because the market was so tightly controlled. Of course, the retail price in Canada was less than the U.S., maybe 50 bucks a gram instead of 70 or 75, because the Saints sold to anybody and let them fight it out on the street. But that wasn't his problem. Getting a patch, that was his problem. Once JT had that, he'd never have to touch the product again. Dave Ogilvy sat in the holding room on the Buffalo side of the border, looking at his ripped open goalie pads and the kilo of coke on the table. He wanted to tell these cops, the young guy and the woman who looked pretty good for late 40s, that they didn't need to rip open both pads, but he kept his mouth shut because he knew there was more going on. These were Canadian cops, Toronto cops, on the American side of the border. They were the only ones in the room with him, and so far no one had said anything about arresting him. The woman cop, Dave figured she must be a jogger, no tits but a flat stomach and very tight butt, was saying no one could blame him for going to the States for his coke. The Saints selling that watered down shit at twice the price. Dave was looking at her thinking he wasn't going to get caught up in whatever the fuck it was she was doing. This cost you what, 20 grand? She could do something with her hair, maybe grow it out or something, get a decent style, but cops probably didn't get paid that much. She was doing the best she could with that tight blouse under her jacket. Then she said, "The thing is, Dave, how are the Saints going to feel about you selling this in Toronto? They think they're your only supplier, don't they? You get what, a key a month from them?" He started to get it, and he said, "No fucking way." "No one needs to know, Dave. We're not going to tell anyone." He said, "No, fuck you." She looked at the other cop, the young guy. They were sympathetic, nodding like they understood, like they were both the good cop. And she said, "Used to be a stinger, didn't you?" "I still am." "Well, it makes a good front. Play a few gigs with your old band. What do you call it, Smiley's People? I saw you once years ago at Canada's Wonderland with Kim Mitchell." We played the Sound Academy last month, big Q107 anniversary thing. Kim was there too." "Yeah, I love those patio lanterns." "You're singing some radio jingles, aren't you? Is that you on the FedEx ones, the office shipping guy?" She looked at him, Dave thinking, you really did your homework. Think you know everything, fine, but I'm not going to fucking help you. And dealing the coke, it makes for a good living. Shit, maybe they were both a bad cop. He couldn't fucking tell. Then she said, "Okay, Dave, we're all friends here on the wrong side of the border. We're just talking. We don't have any jurisdiction here. Look, I'm Detective Roxon. This is Constable Lowen." Dave said, "Yeah, well, I'm not giving you shit about the Saints of Hell." And Lowen spoke for the first time, saying, "You don't think so?" "We know the guy you deal with isn't a full patch yet, or he wouldn't be dealing with you." Dave looked at the guy thinking, "Oh right, so you're the bad cop. But he's on his way up, so you stay close to him, and we stay close to you." "You have to be fucking insane you think I'll go along with this, Detective Roxon." Lowen looked at the torn open goalie pad, saying, "Dave, I don't see you have a choice." "This goes on long enough," Roxon said. "You can call me Barb." Dave took 10 8-balls to Rebecca Almeida, a hooker who lived in the condo building on Queens Quay across from the Toronto Star building, and asked if maybe he could get a tip for the delivery. Rebecca, 21 years old and sexy as hell in her yoga pants and sports bra, held out the $1,500 and said, "You can have this, or we can fuck. Which one do you want?" "How about just a blowjob?" She peeled off $500 and said, "You still want it?" holding out the grand. Dave laughed, said he was just screwing with her. "That's my business, you're ever really interested." Too rich for my blood. He took the 15 and Rebecca took the coke, walking into the bedroom, saying over her shoulder, "You ever get a hit single, we can talk." Dave watched her go, thinking, "This Christmas song I'm working on gets played enough, you never know. It was a novelty song, but close enough. How else do you get on the radio these days?" Rebecca came back into the living room saying, "I'm going to Ottawa for a few days. Can I get some more by Monday?" "Sure, as much as you want." She raised her eyebrow and tilted her head looking at him, and he said, "You're a good customer." She said, "Sure I am," and walked towards the door. She looked at the money still in his hand and said, "You sure you don't want to spend a little of that? You're already here." And he said, "No, that's okay. I have to meet a guy." She said, "Okay, but he won't fuck you like I can." JT was waiting at Cherry Beach, middle of the afternoon, and no one was around, not even a dog walker. Dave pulled into the parking lot in his Monte Carlo, and JT said to follow him. "So," JT said, "you still had some left from last month?" And Dave said, "What do you mean?" And JT said, "You sold some this morning. You still had some from the last delivery." And Dave said, "Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, just a little." They walked into the woods there toward Unwin Street, Dave following. JT said, "That's good stock management. You're doing good." "Yeah, well." JT stopped and said, "What?" And Dave said, "Look, I have to tell you something. Some cops talked to me." JT told him to hang on, and they walked further into the woods till he was sure they were completely alone. Dave said, "It's like we're fags coming out here to get laid." JT said, "What about the cops?" Dave shifted on his feet. "Yeah, they stopped me on my way back from New York, from that charity hockey game I played in. You know, Celebrities Against Old Timers. We had Jason Priestley, a couple of guys from Tragically Hip, a couple of the Bare Naked Ladies. Michael J. Fox was coaching. What the fuck else is he going to do, right? Can't hold a stick." JT said, "Yeah. Yeah, so they stopped me at the border, and shit, this is hard. Take your time. They stopped me, and really, they wanted to know about you." "Me?" "Well, the thing is, I was bringing something back. I had some what? Fuck you know, it's just, anyway, I don't want to, look, I was bringing back some coke. A guy sold me some while I was there. It was so cheap." "Yeah, that American shit. It's watered down, you know. What did you get, 8-ball? Dave closed his eyes and JT nodded, said, "Tell me, Dave." "Guy sold me a kilo. But they knew, the cops, they knew. Some Toronto cops stopped me at the border. They didn't want to arrest me. They wanted me to give info about you." JT said, "Oh yeah, what'd you tell them?" "Shit, JT, you know, I didn't tell them fuck all. They didn't even know who I dealt with, really. They didn't have a name. They just knew I bought wholesale in Toronto, so it must be from a saint." "You're not wearing a wire now, are you?" "Fuck, no way." JT said, "Okay, that's good." And Dave was getting antsy, pacing, looking around, but there was nobody there. He said, "I figured, you know, I'd tell you right away. I'd tell you, and then I could be like a double agent. I could give the cops wrong shit, like misinformation." JT said, "That's good thinking." "Yeah? Yeah, that's a very good idea. And you're sure they didn't have an ID on me?" "Positive. They showed me pictures, you and Boner and Mitch, a couple of the other guys, but they didn't know squat." "Okay, that's good." JT took out his .38, his Colt, and shot Dave in the face. 2 more in the back of the head when Dave was on the ground, thinking, shit, pictures of us, fuck. He'd have to call one of them now, get some help dumping the body, get rid of the shitty Monte Carlo. Then he thought, no, just leave it here. If it got out that one of his sellers was picked up by the cops, he'd be even further from that patch. Detective Roxon said, 3 shots at close range. And Lowen, who was talking to the coroner, said, yeah, his head's pretty much blown off. Have to wait for the lab reports. She said, why? Because we can't figure out one of the saints did it? You sure he wasn't out here looking for a Hummer? The whole place was taped off, uniformed cops all over looking for evidence. Roxon knowing they wouldn't find anything. Lowen said, shit, he's got a Christmas song on his iPod. He had one headphone on, nodding to the beat. It's Devil in a blue dress, but it's changed. Now it's Santa in a red dress. Is it him singing? Lowen said, shit, yeah, it is. Roxon said, "Too bad for him. That one might have been a hit."